So, Public Procurement Bill is sitting with the president.
Yeah.
If he was to sign that in the next couple of days, and it becomes effective, and the effective date is a big question. What does it practically mean, though, to practitioners?
Nothing at the moment. Absolutely.
Will it within a couple of weeks then maybe resolve this issue on the preferential procurement?
No.
2022?
So,
why is that?
No. So the big work now, and this is quite from the earliest days when we saw the current draft that's now went through, it was quite clear that the big work has not been the act. It's going to be the regulations. So I did a very quick check yesterday, again, of the act. And I went through the act and I found about 53 individual items to be dealt with that must be dealt with in regulations. I mean, the first half of the bill, almost every section.
Yeah.
So for this bill to work, for this to be an actual system, we still need a lot of law to be created. And also, because of the amendments made to the bill during the parliamentary process, the making of those regulations, firstly, they became more. So more things have been put into regulations, which a lot of them would have gone the instruction or more informal route. They're now mostly in regulations.
Yeah.
And secondly, this is the big point, there's now very strict public participation and tabling requirements for the making of regulations. So the regulations won't be able to be made easily or quickly. It'll take time. This is, of course, the process that's now unfolding, and I would very much assume that Treasury is already working on this. It would make sense for them to have started thinking about where they're going and doing background work. So it's not as if, they're only starting now. I'm sure that they've already done a lot of work on this. But the fact of the matter is, until the president signs this thing, they can't formally start to engage and to assess any of these things. And remember, that consultation process on many aspects is not simply just a public consultation process, but there are on a number of elements very specific obligations to consult with other ministers, with SALGA, etc., etc. So there's quite a structured process, and as is always the case, one would assume that Treasury would be doing those internal, let's call them internal consultations, before they put something out into the public sector. That's the usual route. So there's going to be some time where these regulations are going to be created, consulted, and only then will we start to see where this is all going. And from a transactional point of view for organs of state, what does this imply for them? What we will also see, I think, the moment we start seeing regulations come out in whatever form, is Treasury's thinking around the phased-in implementation, because it's very clear now from both the wording of the bill, but also the process through Parliament, that this bill is not going to be implemented just in one big swoop. It's going to be implemented in phases, so some parts will come quicker than others. If I were to be a betting man, I would say we would probably first see chapter 4 and 5 and related elements being implemented first. That's the operational part of procurement methods, criteria, set-asides, preferencing,
thresholds,
thresholds, all of that. I think that's the first part that we will probably see come out and being implemented under the Act. And I think what is probably going to be put on the back burner for the moment is the whole dispute resolution mechanism. I think that is probably only going to be on the cards much later, because there's a lot of work still to be done on that. Costing, for example, setting it all up, all of that. So I think that would probably not be not in the near future. What this does mean, however, for organs of state, for anyone working in this space, is that you need to immediately start doing your own backroom work. So just as Treasury is doing a lot of work at the moment, I'm absolutely confident in preparing, starting to do this work. Every single one in this space should be doing the same thing in their own backrooms. And the thing to do is to go and sit with that bill and go through it line by line and figure out on which one of those lines would you need to make adjustments to the way you do procurement at the moment. And those adjustments, I would suggest you need to kind of categorize for yourself in terms of adjustments in our own SCM policy, what's now called the procurement system under this bill. So where would we have to tweak the formal rules? Because if, for example, you're in a non-departmental organ of state, you would know that you will have to go to your board with all of this. It's not an easy matter of just sending a memo up to your accounting officer. If you've got an accounting authority, that's quite a process. And I would say, start to do the prep work as soon as possible. Even though you might not know the actual details, you'll be able to identify the areas that is simply not aligned. So that, I think, is the one part. And then the other category there would be in your own practical operations. So where do you think the way that you're doing things at the moment will have to change to adjust to what is coming down under the bill? I think that's the one area. While you're doing that, what I would suggest is that you also make a note for yourself on what aspects will there be more detailed rules in regulations. You can very clearly see it when you work through the bill, and then start to prepare whatever you want to insert into that process. But this is now going to be the detailed process. The bill was always going to be very high level, very generic, very open-ended. The regs are going to be the place where much more specific, even sector-specific or category-specific or industry-specific or whatever other kind of differentiation you can think of will be possible. Not just possible, advisable. Treasury's been very clear about this all the way through. They've always said one of the reasons they don't want a detailed bill is they want to be able in the regulations to tweak, to be specific. So this is the opportunity. So if you're an organ of state and you work in, I don't know, the agriculture
construction or something, agriculture,
great case, ICT, pharmaceuticals, I don't know, whatever other weird and wonderful field you're working in, you know what are the peculiarities of procuring in that field, and where would you need specific rules, and what are those specific rules? Start to capture those. Start to write them up for yourself so that when the opportunity comes to participate in this drafting process, that you can share that with National Treasury and say, hey guys, you know what, when we procure in pharmaceuticals, these are the dimensions that are critical. So you can't force us to do X. X is not going to work for us. You can have a general rule on X. But for us, we need X plus 1. And this is what we propose. I think if we all do that, then we are really all contributing to creating the system we want and need. And I think that opportunity is going to be there. So it will be, I think, useful to do that. So that is, I think, the thing that I would advise all organs of state to do immediately. Private sector suppliers, I think you are in a very uncomfortable space, because this is for you a wait and see. Of course, industry bodies, Ingrid and people similarly situated, the same, I think, applies to you as would apply to an organ of state. I think you guys are well placed to assist Treasury in saying, look, this can't work for us for whatever reason, and start drafting those things the way you would like to see it. So I mean, I think those are the things that one could immediately do.
Prof, Ernst is asking you for a possible implementation date, and I'm going to challenge you and I to at least put something on the table. So you said something. You said something interesting there, that they probably first have to consult with the relevant ministers. So who have to still be appointed. So what are we're looking at a month, 2 months, probably 3 months before they're ready to be consulted. So there's quite some time before that happens. Well, of course, there will be drafting and doing some work in the background. But so is that right? They would have to first go there. Then there would be, okay, this looks okay, fine, and then they would send something out possibly. So if we're looking at chapters 4 and 5, what, 6 months?
At the very least, I would say. And remember, this must go back to
Before the
Parliament.
draft, 6 months before the draft is issued.
No,
Or,
I think
or do you think it might be sooner?
Yeah, I think we can do it probably quicker than that. It depends a little bit on how quickly Treasury wants to move on this, but I think it is possible to do it quicker than 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
A lot depends, of course, on next week.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
if there's not a lot of continuity after next week, it's going to take longer. If there's high levels of continuity, it'll be quicker. So who knows? I mean, that is up and down.
Okay. So
But
best case 3 months.
Best case, I would say 3 months. Get internal discussions going, figuring out who these ministers are, figuring out what is the policy of the new government, because there will be a new government.
Yeah.
Maybe the same party, but it will be a new government. So, for example, things in Chapter 4 that I think are critical, things like localization, so Section 20, designation, that will depend on the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition. And then there's that
thresholds for set-asides and pre-qualification and subcontracting, all those,
the whole Section 22, which deals with job creation, labor absorption, benefication, innovation, SMMEs. That's at least, if I count quickly, 4 different departments that must be engaged with, each one with their own policy views on. Dennis is trying to put us on the spot here, but let's say a minimum of 3 months. I would suggest before we see anything hit the public sphere.
Yeah.
Then a decent amount of time for engagement with the public. Then, if the previous engagements with the bill, the draft bill, and then the bills, anything to go by, a lot of time for Treasury to work through all those submissions.
Yeah.
Because now we're talking about really detailed stuff, right?
Yeah.
So one would expect even more.
Yeah.
So I think, and then it must go back to Parliament, and we've got a new Parliament. So, I just don't see this happening within a year. I really don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in the meantime, the unfortunate reality of our first topic today is that we're in this holding pattern.
Yeah. So it's possibly your best case is possibly 12 months, probably looking at, and it'd be, even if they were to reduce the scope to just a chapter 4 and 5, it's gonna be a stretch to even do it in 12 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's still a lot there, right? Because remember, there's nothing yet on even a single procurement method.
Yeah.
All of that must be developed.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I think we need to be a little bit patient with this part, because the last thing we want is for us to now say, oh, we want this as quickly as possible. Of course, we all know it's urgent. That is a given. But overdue haste at this stage, I think, will be detrimental to our system. I think we need to allow ourselves the time and the space to really think through what it is we want, what must it look like, and this is what we're going to do in this stage. So I do think that we should give ourselves, and with that I mean Treasury, that's going to drive this process for us. We need to give them the space to do it properly. I mean, it's in all our best interest to do it properly, not to rush it.
Because this is when we're going to have the big decisions. Do we have a separate set of regulations for local government?
Yeah.
A separate set of regulations for public entities, a separate set for departments and constitutional entities, and
then we go, and then going into sectoral categories,
construction,
right?
infrastructure,
ICT. So there are many ways that one can, services, for example. There are many ways that one could slice this, and those are big questions, and they're not easy.
And this is when they have to be answered.
They must be answered now. So we've kicked that can now a few times.
Yeah.
And then, of course, and I'm just hoping that this is not going to capture the whole process again, because as important as it is, and it is very important, and I'm on record having said this many times, the preferential part is very important, but it's not the only important point. And unfortunately, we've seen that with the bill, that it's the only element that got any kind of oxygen during the whole process, whereas there are many other really important parts as well. But I mean, I can easily see that under Chapter 4, for example, the question about thresholds, the question about targets, that those are going to become like the only things that people are going to be fixated on. And they are important, make no mistake. But they're not the only ones. These other things are, from an operational perspective, as important. I mean, we must have a functional acquisition system.
You can't really separate the system of preference from a method, for example.
No.
Yeah, that's integral. So you have to do 4 and 5 together.
Yeah.
Because that's where we had the fragmentation with the triple PFA and the PFMA and the MFMA is exactly that.
Absolutely.
And we got it wrong in the first 10 years when we didn't get functionality right. And right. So Ernst, and I mean did you get the answer? Ernst, go ahead, Prof.
No, Ernst will probably tell us that we're dancing around the issue again. But I mean, I think on that last point, Shaun, this is a point that you've made quite a few times in the public consultation process around the bill. And I've quickly had a look to see whether there's anyone from any of the legislatures or parliament online. Couldn't immediately see. But I mean, I think this is where I'm glad that I'm not advising parliament or a provincial legislature, because they've got a particularly difficult task ahead of them, because since they've now decided not to bring themselves in under this bill, but to stay for their procurement function under the Financial Management of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act, and yet comply with Chapter 4 only of this bill, there's a very big likelihood that they will now be facing 2 regulatory regimes that's never been written in light of each other.
Yeah.
As you say, the preference part plugs into the methods part. Now, they've now only made themselves subject to the preference part, not the methods part. So if we now, under this new act, come up with weird and wonderful new methods, which I hope we are going to, and we plug preference into that, I just wonder how the legislatures are going to procure, because they've got the old methods. So for them, I think it's a particularly difficult space.
Thanks, Prof. I think very, very interesting. Let's watch very carefully what the president does in the next couple of days. If it doesn't get signed off, I think we're probably going to add another month or 2 onto that process, because there's additional steps that would have to be followed to bring it back into the process again. So that will be an interesting point to watch. And so what you're suggesting is that all practitioners, in particular those that have an interest in this public procurement arena, look very carefully at what the bill says. Pick out those aspects of the bill that will have an impact on you practically, where you're looking for the rules from legislation to help you understand how you should get things done. Start at least identifying those, and then start to put some pen to paper as to what you would like to see as far as those rules are concerned. We're probably a couple of months away from you providing that input to that process. It could be as early as 3 months from now, but let's have a look. But start to get ready and start to become familiar with the terms, the new terms that are in there. Start to understand what does a set aside mean. Start to understand what is a standstill period, and what would the implications of those be on you practically in your organ of state, so that you can engage from a practical perspective, because this is when the rubber hits the road, is going to be at the regulations level. And it's important that we've got people contributing, and that because we've been lucky. Many organs of state have been lucky up till now that we've got a bill which can work. We can't have regulations that don't work. and it's going to be important to be ready for those. So thanks very much, Prof. Any questions? We had a lot of questions that came through from the chat. The key one is the timing, and hope that gives you some feel for what the processes are that would need to be followed. All right. It doesn't seem like we've got any more questions. Any closing comments, and then we can close off. Thank you, Prof.